Okay, so today I want to take us through how I pretty frequently use the neuroregulatory model of emotions. This is lesson 2 in RO DBT. Um, and typically I use this pretty early on in sessions. Um, if I am giving a meal plan to an individual that I imagine is malnourished, regardless of the body size, um, I'm pretty quick to pull this one up. So I'm going to share my whiteboard, and this is literally how I teach it to clients. So first, I start off and I say something like, "Hey, are you familiar with the autonomic nervous system?" And oftentimes they say, "No, what is that?" And you say, "Great. Would it be okay if I shared a bit more about the autonomic nervous system?" And they usually give me a thumbs up. Um, and so I ask them, "Have you heard of the parasympathetic nervous system or the sympathetic nervous system?" Now, sometimes folks are like, "Yeah, I've heard of that before." Obviously, gauge their understanding, ask them questions. But ultimately, this is where you want to do some of the teaching. So, part of the parasympathetic nervous system is something called social safety system. This is a part of what's called the VVC, or the ventral vagal complex. And this is a place where we feel safe, we feel relaxed, calm, heart rate is down, and we actually have a desire to socialize and connect with others. Sometimes at this point, I check in with them and I ask them, like, how often are you in this place of social safety? A lot of our clients are going to say 0 or close to 0, or I'm hardly ever there. It's okay. Well, let me share a little bit more. There's another part of the parasympathetic nervous system, which is kind of this place where we call it overwhelm. So, overwhelm is this part of the parasympathetic nervous system, but it's actually the dorsal vagal complex. This is something that actually frogs have. If you've ever kind of captured a frog and started playing with it or petting it, sometimes it just freezes and it pretends like it's dead. It flops over. Maybe it poops on you. And it's this place of numbness. It's kind of like a zombie. Um, Heart rate is slow. Affect is very flat. And actually feeling emotions is difficult, but also feeling pain is we're less sensitive to pain when we're in this overwhelmed system. Then we have this sympathetic nervous system. Part of this is called the reward state. This is where we feel like super energized, and maybe we're really proud of ourselves, or maybe we're at a Taylor Swift concert. We're just like really probably animated. We might talk louder or faster. We might want to dominate the situation. Um, and so reward state actually takes a lot of energy or a lot of calories, because it's consuming a lot to be able to do all of those things I just mentioned. And then the last part, well, I shouldn't say last because I'm going to touch on one more, but second to last, this is called the threatening cue. So the threat, this is a place where we feel anxious, fight or flight, heart rate is high again, our breathing is fast and shallow. This is like, oh goodness, we're being chased by a bear. Um, and this can be from, noticing a minor detail that maybe other people didn't pick up on, but you did. seeing discrepancies, making mistakes, etc. Can put people potentially into threat. Novelty, I'll put up here. Novelty is this place where we feel kind of everything freezes for a moment. We're kind of assessing the situation to determine whether we're going to go into threat or safety or reward or overwhelm. It's just like milliseconds, right? So there's 1,000 seconds or 1,000 milliseconds in 1 second. So this is happening very quickly. And we might hear a loud bang, and it might alert us. And then we're quickly discerning whether that is like something kind of exciting, maybe a parade, or if we're going into threat, maybe it was a gunshot, or, something else. So at this point, I usually am checking in with my clients. Is this making sense? Are you with me? Okay, great. Let's pretend that they're with us. Now, I ask them some questions. So one question I like to ask is, how often do you think you are in threat? I would say most of my clientele say, oh my gosh, most of the time I am in fight or flight. I'm very anxious. It doesn't take a whole lot to put me into that state. And then sometimes I also ask, how often are they in the overwhelm system? Usually a lot of folks can identify, especially if they're malnourished, that they're pretty numb. They're pretty checked out. And so what I like to kind of illustrate to them is how a lot of this can be feeding into one another with food. So for example, when our bodies are undernourished, let's say you're on a diet, your body perceives malnourishment, especially if it gets to kind of a severe point in the diet or in the eating disorder. The body perceives that as life-threatening, and it says, we cannot stay in threat anymore because, excuse me, because threat is a high calorie consuming place to be. So the body actually down regulates, and it does this without your thinking about it, right? Your body says, oh, we need to protect your organs. So we're going to push you into overwhelm, which is that numbness place. And then what's kind of interesting is, let's say this person wants to get better and they see you, the dietitian, and you put them on a meal plan and you help them eat more adequately. You are helping them come out of overwhelm, but most likely they are going to land right back into threat, right back to this fight or flight, which is why a lot of our clientele says to us, this is terrible. I'm eating more and I feel really panicky. I don't like this place. And that totally makes sense, right? Their body now is like, oh, the caloric intake is not as severe, so we don't have to force them into that overwhelming state. So they go back to threat, and then that doesn't feel good to them. And they were like, oh, it was kind of nice to not feel anything. So they start to restrict again. Body goes back into overwhelm, and the cycle continues. I should mention that there are downsides to being in overwhelm. If you are flat, kind of like a zombie, no emotions, it's actually really hard to connect with people. It's really hard to do a lot of things. And so sometimes I point that out to clients that are ambivalent in treatment, to remind them, like, actually, it's really not within their values to live in a place of overwhelm. That's not a very effective place to be, and neither is threat. But I remind them that the only way to get to safety is through eating enough. So eating an adequate amount of food and also practicing skills. So hopefully the therapist is helping with skill development. But if the client is learning loads of skills to activate their social safety, but they're getting no movement or traction on eating adequately, they're just not going to get there. They're not going to get back to that ventral vagal complex. So I kind of give them some hope and say, like, hey, I want you to be back there. I know it's possible. And it's going to take some work with the food and with the skills. Again, we're checking in with our clients. We're asking them if this makes sense to them, taking questions. Like I said earlier, I do like to give this pretty early on in treatment, because if you could do this simultaneously with meal plans or meal plan increases, you're kind of breaking the chain a little bit of the client coming back to you and saying, oh, this is really hard. I don't like how I feel. I'm feeling all my emotions now. And I like don't like this, so goodbye. Cancel all of your appointments with you, Kayla. You're breaking that because you're telling them ahead of time that this is probably going to happen. It is going to suck more as you eat more at the beginning. But keep in mind, there is a better place in the end. We just have to get through this tough part first. I'm gonna stop my share because I want to add a couple things. My experience doing this with folks, they usually find it very validating. I've had clients cry when I share this with them. I had a client like a month ago say, wow, this makes sense why I've been in therapy for 10 years and I haven't really gotten better because I've never done the nutrition side of things. So it helped her in that moment, like, not blame herself. Like, historically, she was like, wow, I've been in therapy for a decade and I'm still struggling. It must be me. And so it kind of removes some of the shame. But yeah, my experience vast majority of times is that clients feel super validated and they can see how it's habitual. Now, all of the examples I just gave, I'm pretty sure was very restrictive like examples, but think about your clients with bulimia, with binge eating disorder, with ARFID, clients that cut. They are going, or clients that dissociate. They're going from that threatening place of like, oh, I didn't eat what I should have eaten for lunch. And so now I need to fix this. I'm going to go binge, or I'm going to go purge this, or I'm going to go over exercise, or I'm going to go cut, which, air quote, helps them get out of that fight or flight, which nobody likes to be there, including me most of the time. And it gives them some relief, right? Like, this makes sense of why our clients are doing this. And even with cutting, like, Dr. Lynch talks about how sometimes seeing the blood as they cut will push them into that overwhelmed place, which will again help them not feel pain as much. Or think of your clients that might be purging excessively. They really might not feel physical pain in the moment as much because they're in that dorsal vagal complex. Okay. One last, I think, piece on the neuroregulatory model, which is different than everything that I just said. Over-controlled individuals from the research usually live in threat. like biotemperamentally, they are more likely to be in a place of threat. Now, why is that? Well, I'm over control too. And we tend to have more detail oriented minds, meaning we can see the trees very well, but we miss the forest. So, like, I'm noticing all these like mistakes on my desk of like, I have wrappers everywhere. I have like friggin' 7 or 8 post-it notes of things for me to that I should have probably done a month ago. And there's this constant kind of firing in our brains of like, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, fix, 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 fix. Um, so we perceive threat on a lower level. If I walk past my neighbor on a let's say I'm walking and they're walking and they didn't give me like a smile, I might take that as kind of threatening, or like take that as like I'm shifting into like high anxiety of like, did I do something wrong? What happened? Versus maybe other people don't do that. So genetically speaking, a lot of your OC folks are just going to be in threat a lot more. And also think about eating disorders along with what I just said, I guess. It's like how many of your clients notice when their food intake or their what was portioned for lunch for them at higher levels of care is slightly different than their neighbor, or how their pants might fit slightly different today than it did yesterday, or wanting to like precisely measure everything when they cook. Um, these are kind of different examples of how the threat system might be working in someone's life. Now, OC folks also have a low reward system or experience reward. It takes a lot for an OC person to like get really excited and animated and feel pleasure. And again, that's biotemperamentally as well. But also think about how this applies to your clients with eating disorders. For example, do any of your clients kind of get a sense of pleasure or satisfaction or control or feel like they've dominated a situation if they go to a party and everyone's eating pizza, but they're like, oh, I already ate earlier? Um, do they actually get into their reward state because they're winning? They controlled the situation, they fixed it. They're on top of the world, they're dominating, they're following the plan that they've outlined for their food that day. So potentially our clients are getting into reward, but oftentimes it's really not in line with their values. So those are kind of like side tangents to the neuroregulatory model of emotion that I think are helpful to bring into sessions. But for the most part, I share my screen or I do it on that whiteboard right there and I draw it out. It usually takes me 5 or 10 minutes to have a conversation about it. Typically, clients feel pretty relieved and understand it of like how their body is working. So I hope you find that helpful and ask me any questions in the comments below. Thank you.